Hello. So welcome to the Fresh Grade Day 4 on networking training. So today we are going to discuss the Cisco iOS. What is Cisco iOS? What are the some basic router features and what is the like how the router boot up the process, Cisco CDP neighbors. These are the things we are going to discuss. So before we jump into the Cisco iOS, um, I think everybody knows what is operating system, right? If you don't know, operating system, basically, if you are using your laptop, you might have Windows 10 or Windows 11, that's operating system. Or there are some Linux operating system as well, Ubuntu, right, Red Hat. And if you're using MacBook, there's a Mac OS operating system, right? So what are the basic feature of those operating system? You can access, you can install any applications and you can access it, right? You can surface the internet as well. So now in the networking side, if we jump into the networking side, so Cisco iOS, so Cisco all the devices, Cisco or Palo Alto networks, right? Arista network, all the networking devices has their own operating system. That's called Internet Networking Operating System. Palo Alto device has a Palo Alto OS, Cisco has a Cisco iOS, Arista and other Juniper, they have their own operating system for their networking devices. So Cisco iOS stands for Internet Networking Operating System. So iOS, Internet Networking Operating System, is a proprietary network operating system developed by Cisco, and that works on the Cisco devices. Same with the other vendor. If you are on the Palo Alto networks, they have their own proprietary operating system, network proprietary operating system. Juniper has their own proprietary, Arista that has own proprietary operating system. Cisco IOS is a kernel of the Cisco routers and most switches. We can say this one, Cisco IOS is a kernel of Cisco routers and most switches. Kernel allocates resources and manages things such as the low-level hardware interface and security. What kernel does is basically allocate resources and manage the things such as a low-level hardware interface and security. And it provides routing, switching, internet networking, and telecommunication features. What is the purpose and function of the Cisco IOS? Main, in other words, acts as a brain of the Cisco networking devices, right? Cisco IOS acts as a brain of the networking devices, controlling operations, managing the network connection, and it enables the data communication between network nodes or networking devices. And you see, provide the routing, switching, internet networking, and telecommunication functions. And it has a device and platform, right? It runs on the Cisco routers or switches and other networking devices. What are the Cisco IaaS software responsibility? It carries the network protocols and functions. What are the network protocols? There are two types of network protocols, routing and switching mainly. We'll deep dive into that, and security protocols as well. So routing protocols, there are static routes or dynamic. And static routes, there are dynamic protocols such as OSPF, BGP, EIGRP, RIP. These are the routing protocols, and there are some switching protocols as well, like a VLAN, spanning tree protocols. We'll deep dive into that in the next lecture once we discuss with the IPv addressing. So next topic will be IPv. Once we master into IPv6, IPv4, then it makes sense for us to go and jump into those routing protocols and switching protocols, how to configure it in detail in the labs. Okay, now back here, connecting high-speed traffic between devices, adding security to control access and set up unauthorized network use, providing the scalability for ease of network growth and redundancy, supplying the network reliability of connectivity of network resources, and also you can do QoS, quality of services for prioritizing network traffic. When you are connecting like network traffic, right, you can configure QoS, quality of services. and it supports different networking protocols as well. And architecture, there are two, like, monolithic architecture for efficiency resources, and uh, we'll deep dive into the next. Okay. So Cisco IaaS software features mainly delivers the network services and enable the network applications. So it's in a similar way. Oops, sorry. I think I by mistake clicked on the from the beginning slide. Okay, back here. Cisco has software features, delivers the network services, and enable the network application in short, right? Connect to your Cisco routers to configure it. You can verify the configuration, what's in running it, check statistic. Right now, we'll see how, you can see the configuration, what are the terms, right? Uh, RAM, ROM, NVRAM, and everything, how the router boots up process, startup. So you know the basic things, how the router works, where it stores the configuration. But when we do the labs after the IPv4, after once we learn the IPv4, after that we'll do the lab, and during that time we'll deep dive into it, how you can configure actual routers configuration and switching. So in the next few days, you will be more confident how to configure it, the routers. So similar way on the Windows, you run applications, right? Microsoft Office or any other application, and you can run install the Google Chrome or Safari or Mozilla, right, to access the um, internet. So similar way, Cisco iOS, you can enable the networking applications as well. And now let's take a look at the external configuration sources of the routers, right? How you can connect to the routers. There are console port. Okay, those you will have a console cable that you can connect to your laptop, and you can configure the routers and auxiliary ports. So there are some auxiliary port as well that you can leverage, and some internet interfaces like virtual terminal. If you have virtual terminal or telnet server, you can remotely log into the router servers and you can configure it. And TFTP server, right? And that you can use the TFTP as well, or any network management server to configure the routers or switches or any networking devices. So yes, TFTP stands for Trivial File Transfer Protocol. It's a simple protocol that allows user to transfer files between the computers and servers, right? You can simply transfer files from here to there. And TFTP will discuss into TFTP and FTP as well, file transfer protocol. File transfer protocol is more secure. TFTP is a less secure. So TSTP is used to like a boot diskless workstation. If you want to boot any this like a networking devices that doesn't have any disk, right? In computer, we have a disk that's called storage, right? You have some of you have like 256 GB storage. Some of them have 512, or some of them now many laptop supports 1 TB of storage, right? What happens if you don't have storage? Where you will store your iOS images, right? Your operating system, Windows, or your Windows operating systems are stored on your hard disk, right? So some of the networking devices are diskless. In that case, you can leverage the DFTP server to load your images or boot up. And TFTP is used to download and iOS and configuration files. And also TFTP is used for copy configuration files between the nodes and same within the network. And TFTP can deliver initial like a network bootstrap program or kernel and other initial software to the clients as well. And if we discuss about TFTP versus FTP, again, TFTP is simpler than FTP and executes file transfer between the client and server processes. However, TFTP does not provide user authentication, and other useful features are supported by FTP. We'll discuss that later. Cisco iOS user interface function. Now let's discuss what are the Cisco IS user interface more, right? So Cisco, if you want to configure any networking devices, there are command line interface. Simply you enter the command. These are the very easy commands. Once you know all the routing protocols, switching and security, you think networking is very easy. Okay. All you just need to make sure that you understand IPv4 and basic of the networking. IPv4 and IPv6 IP addressing, and all you need to understand is very basic functionality of the networking devices, routers, switching, firewall, and it's very easy to configure it. How you configure it? You can configure through the command line interface. Operation vary on a different uh, internet networking devices, user types. You can copy and paste the configuration in the command line, or you can type the commands, right? And we'll see the basic commands today, like what are the running versions and everything. And there are two primary modes, user mode and the privilege mode. Let's discuss that. What is the user mode now? So Cisco IO software execute mode, there are two main execute modes for entering commands, user mode. So user mode has a limited explanation of the switch or router. In the switch, you will see this greater sign, right? When you see this mode, this is the user mode. So you have limited functionality. So when you see this, it's denoted by greater prompt, you will see then it's in the user mode and you have limited access. It's entry point for all users accessing the devices. And at here, you cannot make configuration changes. So cannot make any configuration changes. Just writing config. Okay. So if you are on a user mode, you can't make any configuration changes. So this is why it's very important to understand, right, that you are on the config mode or you are on the privilege mode when you want to change your configuration. So now this is also called the privilege mode. Second mode is this is the most commonly used for it. Okay. When you are on the user mode, when you type enable, you will be enter into the privilege mode. So that's why this is also called enable mode. And you can detail examination of the switch and router, what are the protocols are running, how it is configured. You can see everything, what iOS version is running on it, right? Similar way in the Windows, you have Windows 10, 11. So in a similar way, in the Cisco devices, there are different types of iOS versions. So you can see those. You can prerequisite for other configuration mode as well. And command mode, you will see the pound key, this hash. When you see this, that's mean you are on the privilege mode or enable mode. So that's mean you can change any configuration, right? You can change configuration, you can save it and view, and you can save basically. And also it is password protected for security. So now Cisco IOS interface and connection. So Cisco IOS has a console port. Uh, this is most commonly used when you want to initially set up any routers or switches, right? It has an auxiliary port. So auxiliary ports, out out of bound configuration, ports, plain old telephone service lines, and it's connected to a modem using a null like a model modem cable. And Ethernet. So Ethernet, there are different types of cables. Fast Ethernet 100 Mbps. Now we don't see 100 Mbps Ethernet cables. So mostly we see in the market is 1 gig Ethernet cables. That is 1000 Mbps, or 1 gig to Mbps if you convert is 1024. Okay. And there are 10 gigs cables as well now, Ethernet cables. And you will see the serial cables. We'll learn in the routers to connect. Routers usually use the serial connection and cables. When we discuss in the labs routing protocols, RIP, OSPF, BGP, that time you will know how the router works and how we can configure the serial cables. It's used for wide area network. We discuss in the initial day one lecture what is a LAN WAN or wide area network connection from ISPs for connectivity type like a frame relay T1, T3. And now this ports, yeah, it's remind me ports is already being replaced by VoIP. If you see the Cisco VoIP devices in many offices or even in your university campuses, right? Because now no one use it. Basically, it's being replaced by the VoIP. And what are the connector types? If you see here, connector types are RJ45. There is a RJ45 cable. Um, when we discuss the labs, I will show you what are the RJ45 and everything. Most commons for Ethernet networking has 8 contacts, and there are fiber optic connectors as well. LCSC are the most common type used for high speed and long distance connectors. You can simply look for what are the different types of cables, fiber optics, right? We'll discuss into it when we do the labs. And there is a console cable. That console cable you basically connect to the routers or any switches and to set up initial configuration or set up the initial devices. And each devices they have a NIC card. NIC especially is called network interface cards. NICs enable computers to communicate with the other devices on a network. And there are Ethernet NICs or Wi-Fi in your laptop. You will see there is a NIC card as well, uh, where you can plug into your RJ45 Ethernet cable. Uh, some of the old devices they have LAN connections, right? Old laptop if you have that has a LAN, you can plug into 1 gig Ethernet cable, right? Those are the RJ45. That connector is called RJ45. If you have old laptop, but now in the new laptop we all see is USB-C. But yes, if you are using the docking system, you can plug Ethernet cable. Um, Even at your home, if you get the Wi-Fi services, right, they will provide you one cable in it, yellow cable, right? And both at the end of it, there is a pin. That pin you can plug into the router from one end. That's a 1 gig cable. That's a RJ45. Now let's discuss the router power on and boot up sequence. What happens when you power on the switch, right? If there is a new switch or existing device or routers, right? What happened to the router when you power on? So let's discuss the router startup process, right? So the startup process follows these steps. As soon as you power on, right, it goes into you power on the device. So basically, if any device, right, what happen if you power on your laptop? First, let's say your laptop doesn't have any battery, so you plug in your cable and put in the charging mode, right? And then you hit the turn on switch. So in the similar way in the router, you have one switch, you can just power on. So similar way to your laptop, right? You power on. So what happens now? So it goes to the POST mode once you power on it. Perform the power on self-test, right? The next is load and run the bootstrap code, and then it's find the Cisco iOS software. Once it's find it, it's load the Cisco iOS software, find the configurations, and load the configurations, and run the configure Cisco iOS software in it. Okay, these are the high-level basic steps. Now, once you power on it, it goes into power on self-test, POST mode. So here it checks for hardware or component interfaces. It verifies all necessary components are present and operational. If issues are detected, error messages are displayed. When you connect the monitor in it or in your laptop, if there are any detected, you will see these are the errors, right? If the only some of the routers has a two power supply, if only one power supply, you will see it. If the one pin is broken, some of the interface are not working, you will see those error messages on your monitor. So this is what happened. It checks the hardware detail at the post. Now bootstrap program, it's load from the read-only memory. So RAM, we are going to discuss what is RAM in the next slide. Read-only memory. So bootstrap happen, it's load from the read-only memory. So this control the search and load process of the iOS. This is what it control the search and load the process of the iOS. And in configuration register check, like a bootstrap read the configuration register value, determine how the router will boot up. And now what happens at this stage 3 and 4 here, Cisco iOS, locate and load the operating system. So how it will locate first? It will look into the flash memory. Hey, router will look into first flash memory. Is there any iOS images in there? If it's yes, it's load from the flash. If it doesn't, it goes in the network like TFTP, trivial file transfer protocol. And if it don't find it in TFTP, it looks into the ROM. So this is how it search the iOS image in here, right? So this is the order the router follow: flash, TFTP, and third is the ROM. And if it's finding the ROM, then it will load it. And now what happened? The next steps is locate and load the configuration files. So once the iOS image is loaded, right, it's configuration file search. What it start will looking for it? It will start looking for the configuration files. Where the configuration files can be found, it can be found on the NVRAM. We'll discuss what is NVRAM in the next slide. Okay, so it look for the NVRAM first, router, and then go for the TFTP, or it will display in the console mode. If not found in the NVRAM, then it goes in the TFTP. If it's not found in the TFTP, then the final boot stage system configuration dialog is launched, right? Like initial setup console mode. So this is the process ensure that router initialize properly, load the necessary operating system, and applies the appropriate configuration. So what is the power router power on boot sequence? Right. Some of the person like for fresh grad, they can ask this question, interviewer. What is the router boot or boot on or boot up sequence process? So this is what you need to explain it and summarize it. Router initially initialize properly, load the necessary operating systems, and applies the key appropriate configuration. So make sure you explain these steps, right? If there is a whiteboard, you want to write down these steps, you want to write down this as well, router boot up sequence. So it basically shows that you understand the bootstrap happen in the ROM, right? Where it locates in the load the operating system file, it start finding in the flash, TFTP and ROM in this order. Okay. And where it will find the configuration file, it first look for it in NVRAM, TFTP, or in the console mode. So this is the boot sequence. Now let's jump into router internal components. These are the internal components. RAM, ROM, you might have studied in your university, random access memory, read-only memory, flash, NVRAM. So random access memory, main operating memory of the router. It holds the running version of the iOS. What it holds is hold the running version of iOS, right? If you are Windows 10 or Windows 11 in your laptop, so similar way, there are different types of version. Well, I will show you that what are the commands in the following slides. So it stores routing tables, how the traffic will take place, right? How the data traffic will forward it. It's called routing table. We'll learn deep dive into the routing labs and routing protocols. So don't worry right now, get yourself familiar with these terms. CF tables or ARP tables and networking tables, everything is stored here. It provides memory for packet switching here. And this is the volatile memory, right? Contents are cleared when the power is turned off. So if everything will go off or erased once the router is powered off. As long as it's power on, it will save these other files. And it's provide faster access and speed compared to other memory types. And depends on the router, right? Some of the typical range is 64 MB to 256 MBs or more, or in the modern router as well. These are more than enough in the routers, okay? And now what is a read-only memory? So it contains the code, system initialize, and basic function. So it stores a POST code, power on self-test. If you remember, we discussed in the previous slide. POST stored here, power on self-test. System boot area code, bootstrap happen here. And it backup the iOS for emergency. If there is an emergency, it backup the iOS. And non-volatile retains data when power is off. And it's only read-only. Content cannot be modified without replacing the chip in it. And now what is the flash memory here? Flash memory generally called for all the iOS images. So all the iOS images are stored here in the flash memory. So it depends on the routers. Modern routers has more flash memory storage capacity. It's like your USB sticks, right? Some of the USB sticks has initially we used to have 8 GB, 16 GB, 32, 64, but now we have a USB GB that has a 256 GB, 512, or even 1 terabyte, right? So it depends on the router, what router they are using it. In routers, we don't need 1 terabytes of storage. It's too much. Even like 16 GB or 32 GB is super more than enough for any routers because IS images are not. Some of the big routers has a 1 or 2 gigs iOS images, but small routers, the iOS images are even in MBs. Okay, so we'll deep dive into it. What are the iOS images looks like into when we do the labs. And place content is used per router at the time of reload. So at the time of reload, this is what we use it. And it is erasable. You can replace the content here if it's a current version of iOS is 10 point something. You can replace with the 11 or you can reprogram it. And now NVRAM. What is the NVRAM? NVRAM stands for non-volatile random access memory. This is random access memory and this is the non-volatile random access memory. What it store is basically it stored the startup configuration file. So here NVRAM we store startup configuration file, right? We looked into the router bootup sequence. It has typically small capacity, faster access speeds compared to other non-volatile memory, and it's used for storing for permanent settings and configuration, such as the startup configuration files. And the router has interfaces where you can connect the cables, and it has their own CPU as well, depends on the router size. So now we know RAM, ROM, flash, NVRAM. NVRAM, this is where we store the startup configuration file, and this is where we store the iOS images. Running versions are stored in the random access memory. Bootstrap and POST happens in the read-only access memory, RAM. Now let's look at only the basic function of the ROM. So ROM bootstrap, right? So bootstrap happen at the ROM. We can do show version in the console command, POST, power on self-test code. So basically ROM system initialize and basic functions. And it backups the iOS images in case of emergency and ROM monitor as well. And it's non-volatile. It's so you cannot erase it, right? You cannot modify it unless you replace the chip. And it's only read-only memory. These memory types work together to provide the necessary storage and operational capacity for the routers. So these are the main basic feature. RAM offers fast temporary storage for active processes, and um, ROM provides essential startup backup functions, and NVRAM ensures the critical configuration data is preserved across reboots. Now finding the Cisco IOS software. So if you run, like if you connect to your router through the console cable or any remote networking protocols or anything, right? And if you run store startup configuration, it will display from the NVRAM configuration register value. And you can, so NVRAM is a non-volatile RAM, store the startup configuration files and retains the data even when the power is turned off. And it retains the data. It retains the startup configuration if the power is turned off. And it has a small capacity, faster access speed. And when you run show version, you can see the what are the show version in it. And checks the configuration register, parse the configure in the NVRAM and defaults to pass file in the flash memory. And then it attempts to boot from the network server, RxBoot or Roman. This is the order for search. When you do show version, it checks the configuration register here in the NVRAM. If it doesn't, if it's fine, parse it configuration in the NVRAM, or it defaults to first file in the flash memory and attempt to boot from the network server if it doesn't find there. RxBoot and Roman code. So here is the router startup sequence. We looked at it at a high level. What are the, but now it's, this is how the flow chart looks like if the router is startup process. Okay. So once you start power on it, process begin when the router is powered on. When you power on, when you click on the power on or turn on the switch, right? This is where process begins. It's run the post. Power on self test. The router performs the self checks to ensure all hardware components are functionally correct, right? And then it load the bootstrap. Bootstrap program stored in the ROM. We just discussed, right? ROM is a read-only memory. It's loaded from the ROM and it's responsible for locating and loading the iOS images. Uh, and if the boot field value is 1, then it goes to the jumps to the checking startup config, right? And it goes into ROM monitor here. So ROM monitor, it's also short form as a ROMON, okay, in other word. So it goes right here if its field value is 1. So again, all the computers understand 1 and zeros, right? So 1 is yes here and 0 no in this flowchart. So remember this. 1 means yes. And now if it's a 0, then it goes no and it look for the boot field value. And what is a boot field value? It says it look for it. Check the boot field setting in the configuration register. So configuration register has some value like 1 and zeros and in hexadecimal as well. And look for it. If it's a 1, then it goes direct to use the IOS in the ROM and RX boot mode, right? So routers boots in the this is the where it looks for the troubleshooting and recovery mode for it. If it's a no, process use IAM in the read-only access memory. So what happened if it's a no? It goes this way, right? It's check up the startup configuration, and in the startup configuration is look for any boot system commands. If there are any boot system commands, yes, do whatever they says, right? It goes come back here and then this way. And it load the iOS if the configuration register bit 6 is 1. That's mean yes. 1 means yes, and it goes to set up the initial dialog of the router because bypass the startup configuration. One mean here, this will bypass the startup configuration, so it goes here. And if it's no, then check for the valid configuration. If it's finds valid configuration, yes, normal startup and complete the boot process. But if it's no, then again it's go to the startup mode. Startup mode where you have to initially define what's your device name and basic parameters. We'll look into it when we set up the routers in the labs. Again, after 3-4 days, once we discuss the first lab, after learning the IPv4 addressing. So this is yes when you do what this says, right? If it's a no, then it's zero. What happens? It checks for the valid IOs in the flash. You remember that order, right? It's flash. So it check for the valid IOs in the flash memory. If it's find yes, again it goes use IOs from the flash and it's go all the way again and follow the same process. It it doesn't find any configurations and it won't bypass the startup configuration. It goes this and display the initial setup mode of the router. And if it's find the valid configuration, just do the normal startup complete. And if it's no, then it goes here and attempt to get IS from the network by using the TFTP or any networking protocols that are configured in the network. So in the network, there will be TFTP or some servers that provide the iOS images. We'll discuss this later. Don't worry right now. So it look for network. If there are any iOS images, the routers can find it from the network, then it can fetch it and load it here. If it's obviously if it's fine, success, yes, use file from the network and load it iOS images and follow the same process, right? And if it's no, what happened is for the configuration register value bit 13. If this 13 value is 1, then it goes yes. If it's no, again go into back and follow the loop here. So if what happened if there is no iOS image in the router, right? And if it doesn't find in the place or it doesn't find anywhere in the network, it will simply follow this loop. Okay, it will go on the loop mode. It will keep looking, and you won't see anything in the display. Okay, so basically without iOS router, in other words, we can say it's useless because you can't configure any configuration and you can't use it. So you need iOS images. So similar way in your laptop, if you don't have Windows OS, can you run your Microsoft applications, Word or PowerPoint or any other applications, right? Adobe software directly on your laptop hardware? No, it needs supported operating system, right? So router without operating system, iOS images, it's useless. Right? You can't run any networking protocols or you cannot configure it, anything. You can't do anything. So it goes in the simple loop mode. But if it checks here and if its failure is less than 5 times, then it goes yes and use the load iOS in the ROM mode and it's basically troubleshooting and recovery mode. And once it's fine, it's load the iOS image. So this is the router startup flow chart. So next, loading the Cisco IO software from the flash memory. What happened? It's just the you can run this command show flash and you can see what are the files are stored in the flash storage. And if it's fine, it's load into RAM, Cisco IOS. The flash memory file is decompressed into the RAM and it will load the iOS operating system. Loading the configuration, what happened? When you run the show startup config, it goes into NVRAM. Remember, startup configuration is stored into NVRAM. And so running config is stored into random access memory, RAM, running config. So don't get confused. Usually no one asks this question, but yeah, someone might ask you this like where is the source startup config stored and running config stored in the router. So this is a really good interview question, right? It's very basic, but sometimes people forget it. Even experienced people, network engineers forget it where you store the startup configuration. But Yes, if you want to crack the networking interviews, basically you need to know TCP/IP, OSI layer 7, IPv4 addressing, and very basic. So you're mostly 99% of the interview start with the basic things in interview. Okay. If you know TCP/IP, three-way and SIG, right, how the TCP connection terminated, what are the basic terms of the IPv4 addressing, then they will deep dive into the routing protocols, other switching protocols. But if you fail in the basic, then your interview might not long last. So that's why it's very important to understand this basic concept. And these are the questions they will ask. They won't ask too much in detail. Okay. So running configuration stored in the RAM and startup configuration stored in NVRAM, non-volatile random access memory. Now let's take a look. I took a screenshot here. When you log into any of the router and when you run this command, if you could recall it, what is this has means executive mode. You are in enable mode or privilege mode. So that means show version. You can run the command and you can see what versions we are running it here. So we are running a 12.0 or 12.03. This is the release. And system bootstrap version, you can see it here. And what is the uptime? 20 minutes, right? These are the basic commands. We'll discuss more during the lab how it works. So configuration register value, right? How you do, you can type configure terminal or you just type config. Some of the routers are smart now. You just type the config and it will enable the privilege mode and where you can configure it. So configuration register. So configuration register bits 3, 2, 1 and 0 set boot option. So 0 into 0 means use ROM monitor mode. 0, 1 automatically boot from ROM. 0 to 0 I have examined the NVRAM for boot system commands. It's very important to know this stuff, but you don't have to memorize it if you forget it. It's okay. I never recall asking this, what is the configuration register value question in the even to the fresher. So Cisco device configuration register value is a 16-bit hexadecimal value. 16-bit, it's a 16-bit hexadecimal value. And IPv4, I will teach you how to convert binary to decimal, decimal to hexadecimal, and then we'll deep dive into the IPv4 addressing. So it dictates how the router boot up, including which software image is loaded here, which configuration file to use, and other functionality is accessing the value, modifying the value, right? Importance is the recovery mode. Now let's look at again the show version command. So you can see this is the different version of the router images, right? So there are many different versions and you can see these are the Ethernet cable, serial number and everything all detailed in the show version. So it will display the version of the operating system. When you run the show flash, you see what are the files are stored here, right? So you can see only one file is stored here. This is the file. It's stored here. You can see the name, right? Bin file, bytes, how many bytes are used, what are the available storage, what is the total space. So this is one of the basic commands, show version, show flash, so running version, so startup config, so running config, and so startup config commands. So these are the so runnings and startup config commands here. So running configs, where it's stored again in the random access memory. Startup config is stored in NVRAM. It's very important. Running config stored in the RAM. Startup config is stored in the NVRAM. So make sure you remember that. You can see the both has the same version, same image, right? Initial startup of the Cisco router, system startup or routine initial router software, fall back to the startup alternatives if needed. Before you start the router, making sure that power, cabling, and console connections are properly connected, right? And then you turn on the switch. And then you observe what iOS version it's loading and what are the configurations, etc. And boot up output from the router. This is what you see in the boot up output, right? When you load the configuration in your laptop or when you are connected to the console cable here, this is what you will see in your console cable when you boot up. It's very important to see. I will show you in the lab, and you can do that practice as well in your laptop as well by setting up the virtual environment in your laptop. It's very easy and it's very fun thing to do it and very easy things to do. You can see the setup mode or user mode prompt, right? Unconfigured versus configured router as well. So we'll discuss and see into the labs. When we set up the routing labs static, we'll see how you configure the routers. So setup, you can type the setup system configuration dialog, yes, would you want to display welcome message, what are the policies or rules you can set up as well. Some of the basic management, if you want to set up that, you can do it in initial configuration dialog. And you can set up the interface summary as well. Like, hey, this interface is connected to this device, this, right? You can provide the description and you can see it everything. And you can find the interface, like set up initial global parameters, like what is our router name. Um, you can set up any Cisco router name. You can set up your name as well to router or any logical name, right? And management, you want to configure it. And these are the setup initial protocols parameters you can see. We'll look into it in the router routing labs when we are done with the IPv4 address, how it will looks, right? I will show you. These are just informational, so you get to know the terms, right? And setup script for the review, and you can how you want to use it, enter your selections, right? You will see the IP addressing. You will better understand after next 3-4 lectures what are the IPv4 addressing. So as soon as you saw IPv4, you will know what are this. So when you are on this mode, remember it's a user mode prompt. And if you see greater sign, right, this user mode. And if you see the hash or pound key, that's mean privilege mode. And the user mode command, right? Router, it's very easy to configure router and switches on any networking devices as long as you understand the routing protocols. Very easy to troubleshoot as well. Once you type question mark, it will tell you what are the commands available, right? You can look for it, which command is useful, how to use it as well. Again, in the privilege mode, once you are privilege mode is a hash, right? So once you are in the privilege mode, you type question mark and you will see what other commands are available to use it. Router command line help facility, context sensitive help provides a list of commands and argument. You can see console error message as well, command history or buffer as well. And we'll deep dive into the labs when we do the labs, okay? So router context sensitive help, you can set up the clock. For an example, you type clock, right? CLOK, and it's a wrong. So you won't see it's unknown command or computer name. But as soon as you type CL, you will see clear or clock, which one you want to use it. And then you can say clock, it says incomplete. So you type simple clock again and the question mark, and it says say set, right? So you type clock set, and then it says incomplete command. So again, you type question mark, and then it says this is the format, right? So you type clock set an hour, like 10 minutes, and what are the second 10. And this is how you set the timer in the router. See, clock set 1956. This is hour, minute, and second. This is how you type, right? And you can define the date as well. And some of the editing commands as well, Control A, Control B, we'll look into it when we do the labs. These are the, you can see the command history, some of the Control P, Control N, show history as well, show version, viewing the configuration, and routing modes. CLI modes, again, this is a summary, executing mode, like a privilege mode, configuration modes, interface of the configuration mode, router configuration mode. You can see the VLAN database, how to write, and we'll discuss during the labs. And what are the different interfaces? You can configure it, assigning IP addresses, interfaces up or down, recover the password, boot system commands, debugging Cisco IOS, IP domain, name server, and ping and trace route. We'll deep discuss when we do the labs and next following lectures. Okay, what are those protocols? And the next thing is Cisco Discovery Protocol. It's very easy. CDP is a proprietary utility that gives you summary of the directly connected switches and routers and other Cisco devices. So it's a Cisco proprietary protocol. So only you will find this Cisco Discovery Protocol in Cisco devices. You can't find it in the Palo Alto or Juniper because it's a Cisco proprietary. But they have their own protocols as well. We'll discuss it. So Cisco Discovery Protocol, how it works. Let's say these are all Cisco devices are connected and they are running 10.3 or later version, right? So you can run the Cisco command. Even in this router knows the router is connected to this switch and this switch is connected to the other switch, right? When you run source CDP neighbors, you will see what are the neighbors. This router has a two neighbors, this switch and this switch. And this switch has how many neighbors? This switch has a three neighbors, one router and two switches. Okay, so let's look into it. For example, using the Cisco routing protocol, source CDP. And if you do source CDP neighbors, right, you will see here in the serial 0 who is connected, router B. And in this Ethernet is a switch A is connected. So router is B is connected at the serial 0 and each 0 has connected switch A. And you can see the port ID and everything, all the details you will see in the source CDP neighbors. When you run this source CDP neighbors command at the router again in the privilege mode, you can't run it at the user mode. Privilege mode is has. Okay. And using the source CDP entry neighbors command, um, you can see all the details. And additional CDP command, source CDP traffic, you can see what are the traffics, right? Packets output and input packets here. Source CDP interface, you can see it. Line protocol is up or down. Right. Thank you so much today. So we learned Cisco IS, what are the basic as how the router boot up process is. So CDP neighbors, what are the basic commands of the routers, right? So it's very important to this. And the next we'll learn into IPv4 addressing. All right. Thank you.